I'm Warren Davis. Hi.
Hi, Warren. Hello.
In 1981, I was working for Bell Laboratories, and I quit that job to become an actor, of all things. I was an electrical engineer. I had a master's degree in electrical engineering and a bachelor's in computer engineering, and I worked for Bell Labs for a couple of years, traveling to different cities and installing software for them, and I didn't really like the engineering environment. I didn't really feel like I related to people. And I had done some theater in college, and it was kind of fun for me, so I decided to become an actor. I was living out in the suburbs of Chicago, and I moved into Chicago and took classes at Second City, and had a lot of fun, performed. Of course, I wasn't making any money. I was living off the savings I made from Bell Laboratories, and at some point, I found myself looking in the Sunday classifieds at the engineering jobs, just to see if maybe there was, some engineering job out there that I might want to go back to, because I was not making any money, and I realized I wasn't going to live forever on these savings. And in December, I think it was December of 1981, I saw this classified ad in the Sunday Chicago Tribune for video game programmers. Gottlieb Amusement Games was looking for video game programmers, and video games in 1981 had been around for a while. I had played them in college. I loved video games. I always thought when I was in college that being a video game programmer and designer would be the most amazing thing. But I thought you had to be some kind of special person or genius or know somebody. I just didn't think it was even possible to get a job like that. So when I saw this ad, I was torn, because on the one hand, I decided I didn't want to do engineering anymore, and on the other hand, this is a video game job. So I wrote a letter, and I decided I would just be me. I would not try to be businesslike. I would not try to suck up or sound professional. And I wrote this letter that was, like, "Hey, saw your ad. Might be interested," or so. I don't know what I said. And I mailed that letter in right before Christmas, 1981. Right after New Year's, I got a letter asking me to come in for an interview. So I went in January 1982 for an interview, and I had a meeting with this guy named Ron Waxman. He was the vice president of engineering. He was a very large, round, rotund man with a very gruff demeanor. He would sit, we sat across a long conference table. I was at one end, he was at the other end. He just kind of sat there and he just stared at me with steely eyes. "What makes you think you can design video games?" I was like, "No, I don't know. I never tried it. I love video games. I programmed games in college, not video games." He's like, "Do you have a computer at home?" And the PC, I think, had just come out. There were personal computers that people could buy, and I said, "No. I've used them at work, and I really didn't feel a need to have one at home." I just answered all of his questions as calmly as I could, but I thought this guy hated me. And he took me around for a tour, and I remember there was one guy in particular who I met. They were in Bensonville, Illinois, in a sort of a think tank environment. It really wasn't a very big group. They had a huge manufacturing plant that was unused. It was empty. Nothing was being built there. Their main home was in North Lake, a few miles away, and that's where they manufactured all their pinball games. But they really hadn't come out with a video game yet. A little history about Gottlieb. Gottlieb was a family-owned pinball company. In 1977, they were bought by Columbia Pictures, and and I'm not sure exactly when. At some point, they were bought by Columbia Pictures was bought by Coca-Cola, but I'm not sure if that even happened when I interviewed there. Anyway, but I digress. Which you will notice I probably do a lot. So I'm interviewing there, and I go up and I'm meeting all the guys. And there was one guy who was very much an engineer, exactly the kind of guy I was trying to get away. He talked in acronyms, he talked in tech speak, and that was not me, and I didn't like that. And when I left, I almost didn't take the job. I was like, do I really want to go back and do an engineering thing? And luckily, I said, you know what, I'll stick it out. Maybe if it turns out I don't like it, I can always quit. So I took the job, and I was hired in 1982 to be a video game programmer. So it was a very strange environment, very much a think tank environment. Gottlieb had purchased 2 Japanese games, and they had put those out, but they had yet to release their own in-house game. They hired Tim Skelly, who was the guru, the guy who had a track record, the superstar, or the name, if you will. And he was hired by Gottlieb to make a game, and that game became Reactor, which was Gottlieb's first game. And I was assigned to work with another guy, a programmer named Tom Alanowski, and he was working on like a superhero game. And it was really based on Superman 2, the movie Superman 2, where Superman is fighting the 3 villains from Krypton that had superpowers. And in this game, there were sides of buildings on the edge of the screen, and like Superman would, I shouldn't say it wasn't Superman, okay? It was just some superhero. This superhero would punch some villain, and he would go hit the building, and there would be rubble, like the building would, some bricks and stuff would fall out, and there were little passersby, little tiny passersby, walking along back and forth on the bottom of the screen, and they might get hit by the rubble and die, and so you'd lose points for that. So the idea is you were trying to protect the people on the ground, because you couldn't kill these superheroes. Anyway, my job was to program a bulldozer that came by periodically and took the rubble off screen, because the rubble would make little piles and then, clog the screen. Anyway, that was my first job. That game did not get released. It had problems. They tried, they believed in it very strongly, and they wanted to get that game released, but it went through a lot of changes. It was a joystick, it was a trackball. They called it different names. They called it Protector, then they called it Video Man, then they called it Guardian, and then they called it Argus. I don't know how Argus got in there. I don't know what the hell that meant, but we just joked about it and called it ProVidGuard Argus. But it really, and it was a good game, but the guy who programmed it had never done a video game. This was something that Gottlieb was very big on. They would hire people not necessarily who had track records. They would hire people who they thought might have the potential, and it was we had very much freedom to design whatever we wanted, do whatever we wanted. In some cases that worked out, in some cases that did not work out. Later on they changed their tune, I'll get to that in a little bit, but after this game got canceled, it was time for me to sort of, do something of my own. And I think I'd learned enough to do that, but I still was new and I still was kind of green. It was now April of 1982, and another programmer named Kanya Yamamoto, he did the game Mad Planets, if anybody's heard of Mad Planets. Later he did that game, but at this time he was playing around with our hardware. And he was playing around with foregrounds and backgrounds, and normally the foreground's in the front, the background's in the back, but we had a bit that could switch those, and so he was doing this thing where he was removing pieces of the background to reveal something going on behind it, the foreground going on behind it. The thing he was using for a background, or for a foreground, was an Escher pattern created by Jeff Lee. By the way, Jeff Lee also was the artist who created those little people who walked down, back and forth in ProVidGuard Argus. And I was astonished at what he could accomplish. These guys were like, maybe 8 pixels tall. And they all had their own personalities and walks. And I was astonished with what this guy could do. He was an amazing artist. And he had come up with this, sort of Escher-like pattern of hexagons that, colored a certain way. They looked like cubes. And it filled the screen, and Kahn was basically just removing pieces of them to reveal something going on behind it. But when I looked at it, I thought, this is interesting. If you imagine this as a pyramid, then if a ball were to hit the top cube, it would have one of 2 choices which way to bounce. And if you had, every time it hit, it would have to make a choice. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. In one byte, in a random number byte, you could use each bit to determine, am I going to go to the right or am I going to go to the left? And I thought of the balls bouncing, and I thought, okay, this is a great opportunity for me to learn something and to practice coding, gravity, and randomness. So for me, it was just a programming exercise. So I got to work. I asked Jeff Lee to make a pyramid out of these cubes and give me a ball that could drop. And I went at it, and I had a ball bouncing, and I programmed it, and I was like, wow, that's cool. And people would come by, and they'd look at it, and they'd go, wow, that's cool. I mean, it wasn't a game, it was just a programming exercise. Well, the next logical step was to have a player-controlled character to be on those cubes and hop around. So I went to Jeff and I said, do you have any characters lying around? And he did. He had a bunch of characters that he had made, hoping that they'd be used in the game. You know, one of the things about the culture at Gottlieb is the programmers were the designers. They were the directors of the project. And it was, you know, sort of understandable, because if a programmer didn't program something, it wasn't going to be in the game. You know, it's not like somebody else could code a feature. So at Gottlieb, all of the programmers were always in charge. The other thing was about Jeff is I think he was like the only artist in the entire company at the time, you know? So he was working on a lot of different games. Well, there weren't that many going on that time, but he would eventually be working on multiple games at one time. But he had these characters that he hoped some programmer would take and turn into a game, and he had ideas for that game, but I really wasn't interested in that. I just wanted to get a character to jump around. So I took the orange one, the big oval guy with the long nose. And of course, Jeff had designed him with the long nose, hoping he would shoot stuff out of that nose, but I wasn't interested in that either. So I just wanted him hopping around this pyramid, and I did that. And everybody walked by and they went, that's really cool. And I'm like, yeah, that's really cool. What are we going to do with that? Well, Ron Waxman, interesting guy. So I told you he was gruff, and he did have this gruff demeanor, but at heart he was a pussycat, and of course he loved everybody, but he wasn't demonstrative that way, but he liked to hang around in our little area. We had one big open area where everybody worked, and he just liked to hang around there sometimes late at night and just kind of watch us. And I remember this one time I was sitting there at the Blue Box. We worked on a Blue Box development kit as an Intel thing, pretty big. Had 9-inch floppy disks, if you can imagine that. And he's behind me, and I just hear him breathing, you know. You know, and I'm working away. He's not saying a word. He's just sitting there watching me. And, you know, I guess I kind of got used to it after a while. But at one point, I'm just playing around with this character jumping around, and he goes, what if the tops of the cubes change color when he lands on them? I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. So we put that in, and lo and behold, that is really when Kubert became a game. It wasn't called Kubert; it was just a game that I was programming, and it was called. I called it the Cube game. You know, we didn't have a name for the character; that came later. And then things went pretty fast after that. He needed somebody chasing after him, and you know, Jeff had the snake character, and you know, he needed a way to escape the snake, and you know, and again, it was just, it all kind of came very, very quickly. In fact, I started playing around with it in April. I think it was done probably about September of that year. It was very much a collaboration. I love to hear people's ideas. A lot of people had ideas. A lot of people had a lot of bad ideas. I ended up being the filter. So if somebody said something and I didn't respond or think it was a good idea, it just didn't get in the game. But I did find Jeff to be a fantastic collaborator, as was Dave Thiel, who's here at the show. I might be here today. There he is. Hey. Who created the sounds. You know, Dave created the gibberish sound using the phoneme chip. I guess we talked about it a little bit. But you know, Dave and Jeff and I, you know, became the creative core, with me being the filter and them being collaborators, and it was a very lovely partnership, which I treasure to this day. This is my business card up here. You'll notice the address. That's our Bensonville address. At some point during the development of Kubert, they moved us into the main place, the main plant in North Lake. And the interesting thing about that is, you know, all the pinball guys were there, and we were the video guys. Now at this time, pinball was in kind of a slump. So the pinball guys were a little resentful towards us. Now we didn't know any of this. And I gotta say, you know, the management, they didn't do anything to make things easier. They didn't have a mixer or introduce us to each other. Literally, one day we just were thrown into this space, and the pinball guys were kind of shoved off into a corner, and you know, we'd walk around and we'd be, you know, just think everything was cool, and then we'd walk by these guys, you know, looking at us, and we'd be like, well, why are those guys angry with us? But eventually we got to know them, and we sort of time sorted things out. I only have one picture of myself during the development of Cubert. Can we go to the next slide? So there's a number of interesting things in here, the least of which is the way I look. But you can see the blue box. That was what we developed on at first. There was a time where we moved to IBM PCs, but here I'm still using the blue box. A couple of other interesting things. The monitor shows the screen upside down. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know, I might have been working on the tabletop version. There was a tabletop version of Cubert, and so people sit at opposite sides of the screen. The table is flat. And so when you switch from player to player, there's a bit in the software, in the hardware, that lets you change the orientation so the players can change back. That might have been why that was upside down. The other interesting thing is if you look in the bottom left, you see there's a joystick that is actually mounted on the bottom of like a Tupperware bucket. That was my joystick that I used in the development. And the other interesting thing is it's a four-way joystick, right? And people were used to four-way joysticks being up, down, left, right. When I started developing Cubert, it occurred to me that, if you look at the cubes, the only directions he can jump are diagonal. He's not jumping straight down, he's not jumping straight up. So it didn't make any sense. So I had to rotate the joystick to be at an angle. Well, this bothered a lot of people at Gottlieb. They were like, you can't have a joystick be diagonal. It's got to be up and down. I'm like, no, it doesn't. But this was actually, so the Tupperware bucket had to be rotated because the thing was up and down. Can you go to the next slide? This is my new business card. If you look at the address, it says Northlake. So it's not any different. I really wanted to get a cooler title, but they really weren't giving them out then. I thought like Techno Geek or something, but no, it's software engineer. But that's okay. So we got these new business cards. Let me see, what's the next slide? Let's go to the next slide. Oh, okay. So Kubert was finished in September, and there's a trade show, there's a big trade show in November called the AMOA. I think that's what this is from. This was where Gottlieb introduced Kubert to the world. And so they had to the industry. And so they had a big spread, it tested very well. I should also say, those of you who have never developed a video game, when you're developing a video game, tuning is a very difficult thing. I was talking to some of those Intellivision guys who talked yesterday, and then we were talking about tuning, and it is really interesting because we had an opportunity to put our games out into arcades for testing purposes, and we did that. There were certain arcades in the Chicago area that would let us take our new games that weren't released yet, and we would take these, we called them engineering samples. They looked like video games. We would put them out in an arcade, and we would literally just sort of linger in the background and just watch people play. So people, they'd be in the arcade. They were looking like, oh, that's a new game. I haven't seen that one before. And we would watch and see, did it interest them? Did they stay around? If they put a quarter in, did they stick around? I saw many, many people put a quarter into Kubert and just fly right off the pyramid. They did that. They'd be like, what? What the? Okay, they get the next guy right off the pyramid. Like, what? All right, and then they lose all their life. This game sucks, man. And then they walk away. 5 minutes later, they were back, and they were trying it again. And that's kind of when we knew that we were on something. I did tune the game easier and easier as time went on because I did notice, a lot of people were having trouble with it, and people at Gottlieb, most of them were terrible at it. But not that I think that should be the judge, because the video game designers aren't always the best players. But we did get information from watching people on tests, and we also did focus groups. Here's a very surreal experience. So you're in a room, a little conference room with a mirror that everybody must know is a two-way mirror. And we're on the other side watching all these people, and they're in there, and there's somebody in there who seems to be, not associated with the company or the video game, so he could be one of them. And he shows them the game, and everybody gets to play it, and then everybody gets to talk about it. The thing that I found most fascinating about focus groups is the discrepancy between how people behaved when they played the game versus what their comments would be afterwards. So they would be playing the game, they'd be like really into it, they'd be enjoying, I mean, you could see on their faces how much they were having a great time, and then afterwards they'd be like, yeah, it was okay, you know. But we had to take what we could from that information. I usually based my responses on what I saw as opposed to what they said, but sometimes people had very valuable things to say. It was, you had to be the filter, you know, I had to be the filter. Anyway, I did tune it easier and easier and easier, and it got released. But I kind of wasn't happy with the tuning of it. I kind of hoped it would be, you know, because we got word back that people were playing it for hours and hours. I had hoped that it would be a little harder. So I was tuning my own version. Even at the end of 1982, I was kind of tuning a harder version. And we also changed, I added some features. So one of the things, the discs were static in the original Cubert, but I thought, well, you know, what if they actually start moving up the pyramid? Makes you have to time your jumps, makes it harder. We made some changes to the way the levels progressed, and then we thought, well, maybe we could release this. And we actually put it out on test, but we put it out on test, I don't know, probably within a couple of months of the original Cubert being released. So a lot of people weren't even familiar with the original Cubert, and so management decided not to release it. And I don't know why they didn't just like wait a year and release it, but they didn't, and so it never got released. Fast forward to 1997, I was working at Disney Interactive, and I was working with somebody who was involved with the MAME emulator. Is anybody familiar with the MAME project? So they had emulated Kubert. They had, and since the hardware for Faster, Harder, More Challenging Kubert was the same hardware, I released the ROMs to him. And so nowadays, all of you can play my favorite Kubert, Faster, Harder, More Challenging Kubert. Let's take a look at the next slide. Oh, right, okay. This is a Cubert calendar. I'm not even sure who drew this. I don't think it was Jeff Lee, but Dave Field was saying it might be Chris Brewer, right? He's another one of the programmers who's also a talented artist. He made a whole calendar. Actually, let's run the video, the first video. Now, I brought something somewhat rare. I actually found a video that I shot back behind the scenes at Gottlieb, showing some of the people that work there. It's about 4 minutes long. The whole thing's about 12 minutes long. I edited it down because it would probably be excruciatingly boring. It's already excruciatingly embarrassing, I think, to all of us. But yeah, go ahead and just start it up.
Why are you bothering? Hey, you met me earlier.
That's Joe Ulitz.
Introduce yourself. Hello.
You can take the volume down.
I'm Joe Ulitz. Don't just stand yourself. Look at the camera. Why?
What we were doing was this was after Mach 3. I don't know if you're familiar with Mach 3. It was a flying game on a laser disc. We're using actual footage shot out of an airplane to give the illusion of flight. This is Lynn, and I cannot for the life of me remember her last name, but she was the only female game programmer we had. I don't think she ever had a game that got released, but she was working on one. So what we did was we took the video signal and we replaced the laser disc signal with this live video signal. And this is Fred Darmstadt here. Fred was the co-programmer of Mach 3, along with Chris Brewer. You can also see we have some of the original IBM PCs. Okay, so this is the Mach 3 plane. And you'll see in a second, we just overlay it over the live video. And for some reason, we thought that was hysterically funny. And we were just, you know, laughing our asses off. I don't know why. Because looking back on it, it's not all that funny. Yeah, so now here, this is the video without the graphics. We're looking at the plane overlaid over this video. That's what we're looking at. That's what we think is so hysterically funny at this point.
A sweater that has the plane emblem.
Wait,
Oh no, her hair. It's earrings.
Also, I'm not sure he was seen very short, very quickly, was Chris Krubel. Chris Krubel, and you hear his voice a lot in this, was one of the programmers of Krull, along with a guy named Matt Householder. That was one of the few Gottlieb games that actually did get released.
Here we go.
Now That's Chris Grubel. That's Terry Dorzaff. He did the cabinet art. He was an artist who mostly did cabinet art and flyer art and things like. Oh, there's Jeff Lee. And you look under Jeff, you see those calendars. We actually had those Cubert calendars posted. It wasn't something released, it was just something we did in-house for ourselves.
You're in your little ship and you're another inspiration comes out of play.
There's Jeff, and over on the left, that's Dave Pfeiffer. He was a hardware designer. He designed the hardware for Mach 3, especially the hookup to the Laserdisc, all that stuff. Oh, that's me, and that's my nose.
Just like the Empire Strikes Back.
You know, it's not like we did this every day, okay? This was not a typical day at work, I gotta tell you. But we did have a lot of fun. This is Rich Tracy. Rich Tracy is the art director, was the art director at Gottlieb, and he was instrumental in coming up with the name Hubert. And also, he was one of the designers of Us Versus Them, which I may or may not even get to talk about today, depending on how time goes. All right, I guess we can cut this. I think this is run its course. And let's go back to. Oh, did you? Okay, go to the calendar. Calendar March. Yeah, either one of those doesn't matter. You're just okay. Great. And now go to the next one. So this was for March, and go to the next one. Now this is something, again, I think it must have been Chris, called the Cubert coloring book. This is the front and back page, if it folded. Again, I don't know why he did this, just for kicks. Go to the next one. Here are just some random pages from inside. Got Julius Caesar, Cubert the pirate, next one. Tropical fish, Jacques Cousteau. I just want you guys to know, I spent all of last week going through my attic looking for stuff like this. This is the best I can come up. Go to the next one. This is one of the flyers. So as Cubert was out there, it started to become very popular. And Gottlieb could see it was becoming very popular. It was collecting well and getting great press. It says play Cubert at the AMOA. That's, I think, that photo that I showed you earlier. Yeah, we can just go to the next one. Oh, this is one of the magazines. I have a few magazines, and I scanned the covers, because again, Cubert was just becoming very, very popular. So this is a Cubert on the cover of Electronic Fun Computers and Games. And next, this is interesting. August of 1983, look at the bottom right. This is from Glamour Magazine. Glamour Magazine has a little thing about Cubert. Crazy. Okay, go to the next one. This was High C Cubert sweepstakes. Okay, next one. Some Japanese flyer for Cubert. John Cougar. This is John Cougar leaning on a Cubert. How do you know? That's pretty cool. All right, next. Another magazine. Go to the next one. The New Yorker. Oh my God, The New Yorker is talking about Cubert. Yeah, it's. I know it's hard to read from here, but it's about somebody in Fire Island, and it's just about them playing this new game, Cubert, at an arcade. This is from August 1983. Next one, please. Oh, that's page 2. Next one. Okay. Video Games Magazine. There was a time, sometime in 1983, I think early in 1983, it might have been late in 1982, where somebody named Neil Tesser, who was a writer in the Chicago area, came and interviewed us about Cubert. Gottlieb did not want our identities known. It was very important to them. Now, people like at Williams, those guys, no problem. They were not ashamed to say who their designers were. But Gottlieb was like very tight-lipped about this stuff. So, can you go to the next one? So this is the first page. Inside of this article, I was referred to as D. Designer. That was my little moniker. Jeff Lee, the artist, was referred to as R. Teast, and Dave was referred to as J. Walkman, as the sound guy. The other interesting thing about this article is that I am misquoted, and in a small way, and it really didn't bother me at the time. But basically, it says in this article that I say that I saw a pyramid with balls bouncing down, and that was how I got involved with Kubert. It's absolutely not true. He misinterpreted what I said, because I think what I said was, I saw the screen filled with the Escher pattern, and in my mind, I saw a pyramid. He thought I meant literally. Anyway, but that little misquote has come back. I don't know if any of you have ever read about the history of Kubert on the internet, but there are many sources that basically attribute the pyramid to someone else, either Jeff or some other programmer. It is not true, but it's really interesting to watch how that has snowballed and become, I guess it's about 50-50. Half of the things I read about Kubert are correct, and half the things are just completely wrong. I actually tried to fix the Wikipedia page about Kubert. A couple of years ago, I was just looking at it, and I was, oh wow, there's a Wikipedia page about Kubert, and I was reading about the development of Kubert, and I was like, oh, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And I thought, okay, it's Wikipedia, I can go in and edit it. So I did. And then a couple of weeks later, I was back on looking at it, and they were all my changes were reverted. And I was like, huh? So I changed it again. I fixed it again. And a couple of weeks later, I came back, it was all reverted. And I was like, wait a minute. Then I went to the discussion tab. I noticed there's a little tab on Wikipedia where it says discussion. Most people don't notice it. I hadn't noticed it before then. And I read it, and there are people on the discussion tab going like, hey, some guy keeps changing the Kubert page. It says he's Warren Davis. I'm like, well, and I wrote back, I'm like, well, I am Warren Davis. And they're like, well, we don't know that. And but this is the key thing, is that it doesn't really matter that you're Warren Davis. It doesn't matter. All that we care about is something verifiable. We don't care if it's true. It just matters if it's verifiable, which means that it's been published elsewhere. So if somebody publishes something that's wrong, it's okay to be in Wikipedia. But for you who knows the truth to correct it, not cool. So something to know, just in case it ever comes up in your life. We can go forward. This is a piece of artwork that actually was used in the article, and we can keep going. I just have all the pages of the article. So this article was contrasting Kubert and Joust because they were American games. So a lot of the big games, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, these were all Japanese games. And since Kubert and Joust came out around the same time, and they were both huge, popular American games, that's what the thrust of the article was. That's a nice picture of all the Kuberts in a row. I remember the first time walking into the manufacturing plant and seeing literally just rows and rows of these massive Kubert cabinets. It was an astonishing moment. Can we keep going? This is actually the front page of a licensing brochure. I've got all the pages. This is kind of interesting. 125 plus licensed products. That's nutty. Kubert TV series, also nutty. I don't know if Dave, if you talked about the Kubert TV series, but boy, that was a joke. Okay, and then keep going. Now we've got collections stay strong. But look at some of these. These are some wacky things. Kubert Pez dispenser, the little flying disc. That's nutty. Okay, and then I don't have a lot of this stuff. I used to have some more stuff. I don't know where it happened. Here's just a list of all these things. And then, of course, since Kubert was popular, it got ported to the home systems. And this is the Consumer Electronics Show, which happened in Chicago. This is the one where all of the Kubert home games, home versions were released. We can go. And some of these I can tell. I think this is the 2600 version. But they had all of them, in different little areas. Keep going. This is, what is this? This is the Atari 400-800. This is the Commodore 64. This is the VIC-20, Commodore VIC-20. And this one, I'm really not sure what this one is. Not labeled. But they all varied as far as how good they were. Oh, and this, if you look at the bottom, that's the little Kubert. I think they have one in the museum. It's a little Kubert, little tabletop thing. It's cute. Oh, this is a page of source code. Actually, I should mention, I brought the source code for Kubert. This is something that's been in my attic for years. This is, take this out. You can come up and look at it later, but it is literally every line of code of Kubert. One of the interesting things about this source code is that you will not find the name Kubert in it, because Kubert wasn't named Kubert until pretty much the game was over. Coily is referenced as the snake, or chaser, things like that. Anyway, okay, so the interesting thing about this page of source code is that if you look at it, there's a place, where is it? Coily is actually referenced by name, because by this time, we knew him as Coily. And there's also a little thing about Cubertha listed in this piece of source code. But see, the original, the function name up at the top, it says move chaser, because 99% of the code from Cubert did not change. It was just little things that got changed. Well, let's go to the next one. Oh yeah, this is my business card when we changed our name to Milestar. So I don't know if many of you are aware of this, but Gottlieb, at some point, Columbia Pictures was bought by Coca-Cola, and they changed the name of the company from Gottlieb to Milestar. Now the pinball machines still were called Gottlieb Pinball Games, but the company was called Milestar. And we had a meeting, and all the big management, you know, they called us all in and they assembled us all, and they made this announcement. And literally none of us really knew this. This was all a big surprise. But they sat us down and they unveiled this logo, and they said, okay, our new name is Milestar. And my first thought, which I expressed, and maybe I regret it, maybe I don't, who knows, I said out loud, hey, that's rat slime spelled backwards. They were not amused. They were not amused, but it's a story I can tell now, so for that alone it was good. This is a memo. So I mentioned earlier about it, how we were given free rein to develop ideas. And we were at the very beginning. Howie Rubin was our vice president of product development, and he was a nutty guy who would think outside the box. Really a nutty guy. Like when we were back in Bensonville, he would make us stop working. He'd be like, hey, everybody, you're working too hard. Let's go out in the plant. So we had this big empty plant that nothing was being manufactured, just a big empty space. He'd say, come on, let's go play some football. And he would make us go out in the plant and play football when we wanted to be working. That's the kind of guy he was. But there was a point, probably around 1984 or so, where Howie's way of thinking was not necessarily working out. We had some programs who were working on games for a year and a half, not finishing them. We had games that were going nowhere. We had games that were going out on test and not doing well. And management started to think, well, we got to crack the whip a little bit. We got to get these troops in order. They're a little too full of themselves, you know. And they hired a guy named Bill Adams. And I have nothing against Bill Adams. Personally, Bill Adams, by the way, worked for Bally. He did Spy Hunter. He worked on Tron. I'm not sure if he was the main guy on Tron, but he was a guy in the industry that they hired away to be our manager, our taskmaster. We had a middle manager before that. His name was Bill Jacobs, but he was not a creative type in any way. He was definitely a toe-the-line middle manager, and he just let us do what we want. Bill Adams came in and said, you know what? There's no reason why it should take more than 4 months to make a video game. Now this is where, now Kubert did take 4 months, but Kubert was a fairly simple game, and video games were, you know, a year or two later getting more complex. So we were all like, well, you know, the pressure's on us to make more complex, interesting video games, and now you're saying just 4 months, you know? Also, you know, systems, we might have more memory to work in, so that meant we had more memory to fill. But anyway, Bill Adams became kind of a taskmaster. So in the past, I was able to, you know, pretty much just do what I want and experiment with ideas. And I actually have some of those things to show. I should say, how am I doing on time here? What time is it? Okay, so I'm almost done. But I'll get through some of this other stuff. So Bill Adams was a taskmaster. I had to write a memo. So I wrote a memo. Can we go to the next slide? I know you're not going to be able to read this. I actually have a copy of it here. The first game that I proposed here was called Space Mason. You know, aside from the alliteration, I don't know how I came up with that. I'm not good at naming, by the way, I should say it. Like Kubert, I didn't give it a name. We gave it a name at the very end. Coming up with a name for a game to me was just, you know, a horrible thing. But now I had to make game proposals, so I had to come up with some kind of a name. Yeah, this was something about a guy, a stone worker in a space suit is building a brick shelter on the moon. I don't know, you know, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I ever actually implemented that one. Let's go to the next one. The next one is called, again, not good on names, The Wall. Now for me, this one was actually kind of interesting. This was I don't know if you're familiar with a game called, I think it was called Blockade, or was it Snake or something? It's basically like the light cycle game in Tron, which had a predecessor even before that, where you're making a line, and that becomes a wall, and you can't cross that line because it's like hitting the wall. This would be a sort of 3D version of this, and keep in mind that the original Tron had the light cycle game was not in 3D. Can we go to the next slide? This is like a little mock-up. Actually, can you zoom into this? Yeah. Make it a little bigger, yeah. So the idea is your joystick, the head of this thing was moving one little square at a time, and you had a scrolling background, and you just had to avoid hitting yourself. And I don't think I had much more than that. But I programmed that. It was a lot of fun. But after that, I was like, I don't know what to do next. Go to the next. I think there's one more slide. Yeah, there's another slide of that. Okay. And then go to the next one. So now, another idea at this point was Fort Knox, 2900 AD. Oh, wait, I missed one. Hands. This was kind of a cool thing. I actually made a mock-up of this. I wish I had some pictures, but I don't. What we did was Jeff Lee created a physical, a hand, a human hand, a disembodied hand, and that was your player controller. And I had flies. We had little flies that would just fly around the screen randomly. And it was a two-player game. Somebody controlled the left hand, somebody controlled the right hand. And the idea was to grab a fly. If you could squish a fly, you opened your hand, the dead fly would fall, and you'd get a point. And I got to tell you, we loved this game in-house. It was very simple. There was nothing to it. We were just grabbing flies, and yet we could not stop playing this game. So I thought, this is something to develop. I actually did develop it later when I was hired by Premier Technology, and it became Exterminator, which is a very little-known game, which is a story unto itself for another day. But I did originally propose it here. Then there was, Fort Knox, 2900 AD, which I don't even, can we go to the next slide? I think there's a mock-up of this. The idea here was there was like a spaceship, and a little tractor beam would come down from the bottom, and it would pick things up, and yet there was another spaceship, the other player, and you'd kind of bump into each other, again, just playing around with it. We can go to the next slide, I think, another picture of that. Okay, us versus them, let's stop here. Can we go to the second video? So the one thing that I found that was kind of amazing to me was video of this game, which I called Bunny Bondage. And this actually was developed pretty far along. And the concept was you were a guy with a shield. So that there was a little level with like a maze, but then you were in this arena, and you had a shield, and these bunnies come flying out. And you can only avoid them by hitting them with the shield. If they hit you from any other direction, you would die. And if you hit them with the shield into those little cages, you would collect them, and you would fill the screen, and that's how you would progress to the next level. And of course, there's other little things. There's things chasing after you. This was actually developed, and everybody seemed to like this game. And I have to say, I kind of got bored of it, and I didn't know how to finish it, and I just let it go. But I actually, looking back on it, I kind of wish I had finished this game. I thought it was actually kind of cool and interesting. So that's maybe one regret of my career, that I let that one go. But I did like the idea. I like the concept of just pushing something away, and that was the goal. So push it and direct it into something. Anyway, Bunny Bondage. I think Ricochet Rabbit came to my mind, and I thought bunnies. Or maybe I just hate bunnies. Okay, that's good. That's enough of that. Now, I'm pretty much at the end of my time. I had a long talk about Us versus Them. I've got videos and I've got pictures, but I think I'm going to save that for next year. Us versus Them was a Laserdisc game that I did to go into a Mach 3 cabinet. Dennis Nordman, Rich Tracy, Dave Faust, and myself were the designers. It was a fairly unique game, kind of revolutionary. We actually had actors. And we had scenes on the Laserdisc that told a story as the thing progressed. It was kind of revolutionary. It had never been done. And that will be a story for another day, but it was a fantastic experience. There's a lot of stuff to tell about it. I think I have a couple of minutes. I take questions. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
So in some variations of the Cubert cabinet, you've got pinball knocked in the bottom when Kubert falls off the pyramid. How did that come about?
That was, so we had a tech named Rick Ty, and that was his idea, because we had these pinball knockers, and Kubert jumps off the pyramid, and we thought, he thought, what if when he lands, we have a pinball knocker and it knocks the cabinet? And I thought, that's a great idea, but Kubert hitting the ground shouldn't sound like somebody knocking on a door. It should sound like a sack of potatoes. It should sound like a thud. So what we did was we put a little piece of foam where the knocker hits the cabinet, and it made the exact perfect sound. It sounded like a sack of potatoes hitting the bottom of the cabinet. And we were all very happy about it. Then what happened was, in manufacturing, management basically said, you know what, we don't have the manpower to have somebody come in and put this little piece of foam against the knocker for every cabinet we make, so we're not going to do it. And that's why, you know, it is cool. Many people love that feature, but, you know, those of us who worked on it know how much cooler it could have been, sadly.
So you're saying I need to put a piece of foam in the bottom of my cabinet?
Do it. Do it, absolutely. If you do that right, it will sound awesome. I mean, yeah. I'm sorry. Any other question? Oh, yeah.
Since you know you were in the same area with people who were working on pinball stuff, was there any weird like cross promotion between Kubert and pinball, like a pinball machine that had Kubert?
Well, there was a Cubert pinball. Yeah, in fact, I played it last night. It's at the Pinball Hall of Fame Museum down on Tropicana Boulevard.
I've actually been there.
Yeah, they have a Cubert. It's called Cubert's Quest, and it is a Cubert pinball. You saw the sounds from here. I played it, Dave. Any other questions?
The trailer that they're showing upstairs from Wreck-It Ralph about the video game character has a cameo with Kubert in it. How do you feel about that?
That's a good question. How do I feel about that? Let me get in touch with myself. Thank you. He asked how I feel about Kubert in his being in the Wreck-It Ralph movie. And the answer is I am happy that Kubert is still remembered. I'm actually very happy and very grateful that anybody still remembers Kubert, because nobody really expected after 30 years. By the way, this is Kubert's 30th anniversary, so thank you all for being here. I am happy about that, and it has disturbed me somewhat. You know, I felt a little slighted that Kubert kind of came at the end of the wave of video games, and some people remember it so fondly, for which I'm grateful, and other people, you know, it's in the media, it seems to get eclipsed by, Frogger and Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. And certainly it wasn't as big as Pac-Man or Donkey Kong, but it has become an iconic character, so I'm actually grateful that they brought him in. I don't make any money off of that. I've never made any money off of Kubert because I never owned the rights. We all did work for hire, so but I am glad that the character lives on. Anything else? Sorry, over here.
So how did you actually come up with the name Kubert? I know you were saying.
How did I come up? Well, I didn't tell that story because I've told it before, and I don't know if many people have heard it or not. The question is, how did we come up with the name Kubert? And I'll try to tell that story briefly. When the game was pretty much finished, we knew we had to come up with a name. And everybody pretty much was in agreement that it should be the name of this character, but the question is what to name this character. So the first thing I did is I went around to everybody at Gottlieb with a pad, and I just said, what are your ideas? What are your thoughts? Because as I said, I am bad at naming things. And so I had a list of about 60 names. And one of them, the only one that I remember for some reason, was given to me by Frank Starshak, who is one of the managers there. And it was Arnie Aardvark. I guess the nose. I didn't, think that was a great name, but, it went on the list. None of the ones on the list really seemed to work. And so we had a meeting, and we had a meeting with all the creatives, except for some reason for Dave, because I guess he was gone, or Mad Planets. He was working on Mad Planets. But we had a meeting with the creatives, and we, were just literally for an hour just hammering out ideas. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Howie Rubin, the vice president of business development, being the maverick that he is, he wanted to use the cartoon balloon, the swearing. He wanted that to be the name of the game. And in fact, I don't know if you probably know this, a number of games went out on test with that marquee. It just has the swearing balloon as the name. We were like, yeah, but it's dumb. And he was like, no, it's great. And we were like, but how are people going to refer to it? And he said, you know what, if the game is good, they will find a way. And luckily, cooler heads prevailed, and it did not go out that way. But that was Howie's, wish, that it would go out like that. We just kicked around names for a long, long time, and it was Rich Tracy who started playing around with the theme of cubes. He's like, well, there's something about cubes, Cubert. And he wrote on the whiteboard, C-U-B-E-R-T, Cubert. And we all were looking at that, and then somebody was like, wait, what about Kubert? So we took the C-U out. Somebody put a Q with a dash. And then Jeff Lee put in the pièce de la résistance and made it an asterisk. And there it was, Q. And literally, we all were just like, yeah! It was a crazy moment that we all just knew that was perfect. And that's how Cubert got his name. Any other questions? Yeah.
And you said you use, I guess, a voice synthesizer in the machine to do some of the voices and that. Did you ever play around having Cubert saying any English or anything, or has it always been gibberish?
Well, the question is about Cubert's voice, speaking random phonemes, and really, Dave, do you want to come up and answer that one? You're the guy. I'll let Dave Thiel answer this one because this is completely his domain. Yes, a round of applause, Dave Thiel, everybody.
Right, I so dressed for the occasion. What was the question? What about his voice?
Where you use the voice synthesizer in the machine,
Yeah.
you obviously do the gibberish.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a time where you had maybe speaking some words or even maybe some cuss words or?
Well, the whole reason Cubert speaks like that is because I inherited that soundboard for the very first game I did Reactor from the pinball guys, which was, way cool to have a pinball machine that talked, though Gottlieb did it the second, so who cares? But they used this chip for Mars, God of War, except when the machine said it said Mars, God of War. So management gave me this board that talked for Reactor and insisted that Reactor talk. Well, and they picked a feature that it made sense for it to talk because your eyes were busy over here and some stuff was going down here and you were getting points. So they wanted it to say 10,000 bonus points, 20,000 bonus points, and that'd be cool. Have that awareness. But that chip is not good.
Which chip was it?
The Votrax chip.
SCO1?
The SCO1, produced by the Federal Screw Works.
Yep.
And there's a lot of truth in that. So, as an engineer, I sat there for 2 days trying to save bonus points. And I would work, and I would work, and I would code it. You start with the obvious set of phonemes, and then I would play it, and it would say, bogus points. And then I would, think outside the box and start putting odd phonemes in. And after you do that long enough, you begin to think it's working. So then somebody would come by in the lab, and I would grab them by the shirt, and I'd sit them down and say, listen to this. And they would go, what are bogus points?
We should have come up with something for bogus points.
I know. Yeah, ultimately we just said 10,000 points. But out of that horrible, frustrating 2 or 3 days in the lab, at some point we just said, screw it. What if we just put random numbers into the chip? Cool! And actually, I'm proud because I think this is the finest use of that technology. But you're not supposed to understand it. And there are 2 phrases in Kubert that were coded to actually say something. When you finish putting in your initials for high score, it says, bye-bye. And when you power up the machine,
Hello, I'm turned on.
and that's it, right? And I think we probably sold more Votrax chips for the Federal Screw Works than anybody else. I mean, Radio Shack made somebody made a little box that had the SCO1 in it, and you could attach it, I think, maybe to the Tandy Color computer or something.
Well, I have one for the Atari 800.
Atari 800, yeah. So the chip was out there, but not in big numbers, and there were more than 30,000 Cuberts.
I also just have to shout out to Dave the genius sound, which I believe was your sound, of the coin. When you put a coin in the coin slot, it would drop into the coin box. Now normally you wouldn't hear that, but he had a sound of a coin dropping into a metal box that sounded fantastic.
that's I'm very proud of that sound because all the sounds in Kubert are computation. They're programs. There were only 2,000 bytes of memory for sound in Kubert. And obviously, if you know anything about sampling sound, 2,000 bytes gets you, shh. That's all you can do if you're going to just sample something. So everything is a program. And then so endlessly I'm writing these bizarre programs trying to move a speaker to 256 different positions fast enough to make a sound. And when I came up with the sound, it sounded like a coin in a glass jar. This was a good day. And I was very proud of that sound because you can't imagine how hard that is.
Thanks.
All right, I guess we got to wrap up. I just want to thank everybody for coming out and listening. Thank you for your support of Kubert and your love of video games. And thanks for being here. And if you guys want to see any of this stuff, I'll hang around a little bit and we'll take a look. Thanks.